Hi everyone, welcome to Sunny Day Discussions. I am Sunny Day. So today obviously I'm going to start by the mass shootings. On July 10th through the 13th, there was only 3. That's actually pretty good for America. I want to get into SCOTUS's decision to legalize bigotry against the LGBTQ plus community and kind of go into that a little bit. Less than 2 weeks after SCOTUS issued that decision, allowing a non-existent web design company person the ability to discriminate, a Michigan salon owner decided not to accept anyone from the transgender community. Now, the salon's name is Studio 8. She says she has no issues with the LGB, but she doesn't approve of the TQ+. So already we're seeing the repercussions of legalized discrimination. And I know it's only for so-called creative businesses, but it's so vaguely worded that we don't necessarily know the boundaries. What is considered creative and what isn't. A restaurant, a 5-star restaurant that has plating for their food, is that considered creative? Are they allowed to discriminate from there? Sandwich artists, it's so vaguely worded that I feel like it's going to bring a lot of cases through the courts. And it's also opening so many doors for legalized discrimination. Do you think it's not going to stop at members of the LGBTQ plus community? Soon we're going to see people taking it to the Supreme Court that don't want to serve Black people, or that don't want to serve Jewish people, or Hispanics. I mean, it's endless. And I think we might see a lot of court cases going up through the courts, through the federal court system, all the way to the Supreme Court, basically just to say that they can discriminate against people. It's taking us back to Jim Crow. We'll see signs in restaurants and stores that say, we refuse service to trans people or queer people or Black people. It feels like it's going to head in that direction. I might be wrong, but that's the direction it sure feels like it's going to go. It set a precedent for legalizing discrimination. And like I said, it's not going to stop just at the LGBTQ plus community. Any marginalized group is going to be targeted. Now, I also want to put on blast all of the conservatives who use the term groomer so blanketly with zero evidence. When they use that term so much, when there is no evidence of that activity, it starts to lose its meaning. It starts to lose its effectiveness. So when you have an actual case of grooming and someone complains about it, it might not be taken as seriously because of the blanket groomer's narrative. And just existing as a member of the LGBTQ community or a trans person does not equate grooming. Here are some real instances of grooming, and trigger warning, it's not pleasant. So in Orange County, a cheer coach was charged with molestation of 6 girls as young as 11. In Portland, Oregon, a David Douglas High School coach was charged with sex abuse of minors. A Cherokee Bluff High School girls soccer coach is arrested for child molestation. A Tennessee soccer coach accused of drugging and filming himself abusing boys ages 9 to 17, was arrested. He left his phone in a restaurant, and the restaurant workers went through it to find out who the owner was and found all sorts of videos. Now, those are people that are put in positions of power and inherently positions of trust. And what they do is they build the trust of the children enough that they can get them into a vulnerable position. That is grooming. Existing as a transgender person or a drag queen or LGBTQ+ is not grooming. And they're doing a huge disservice to all the victims of actual grooming by this blanket blame with zero evidence. It's disgusting. It's dangerous. And if you do that, you're vile. You have zero morals. I'm sorry. What you're doing is endangering people who are actually victims of grooming and kind of protecting actual groomers. So you're doing a huge disservice to children by this blanket blame and claim of grooming. Now, another touchy subject that many people don't like to hear about, don't like to think about, don't like to talk about is police misconduct. I've said in previous videos, I believe we need to have police, but I believe we need to have well-trained, well-vetted police. And if you happen to have a police officer who does something illegal or wrong or egregious, hold them accountable. Don't protect them. Now, here's some examples of some police misconduct. So, in Rankin County, six sheriff's deputies allegedly raided the private residence of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Terrell Parker without a warrant. They are accused of torture, waterboarding with milk, alcohol, basically any liquid they could find, sexual assault. All of this lasted about 90 minutes. And the grand finale was one of the officers put his gun into, I believe it was Michael Jenkins' mouth and pulled the trigger. He was lucky, he survived. But his tongue was severed. He had to have lots of surgeries. Overall, it was a horrible, disgusting situation. And to imagine how helpless these two men felt. Because these are people in places of authority, in positions of authority. And historically, if you accuse a police officer of doing something terrible, no one believes you or they're covered, particularly if you're a Black person accusing officers of doing something like this. And it kind of seems to have occurred here as well, in the fact that I believe this occurred in January of this year, and just recently, the officers were fired, but not arrested. Anyone else who broke into someone's home, tortured, assaulted, and shooting somebody, would be arrested and in jail right now or free on a huge bond. But because they're police officers, and probably because the two victims are Black, they were fired. Hopefully we'll see charges brought against these officers, but I can't guarantee that the DA will be willing to. Then in Detroit, police are accused of framing a man for murder. Kenneth Nixon spent 16 years in prison, allegedly for killing a 1-year-old and a 10-year-old in a house fire. Nixon was released in February of 2021 after an investigation by the county prosecutor and found that there was no real evidence of him being there. police are accused of not actually investigating who started the fire. They are accused of believing the account of a 13-year-old, the sibling of the two children who died, 13-year-old child who changed his story multiple times and contradicted himself multiple times. And they are accused of manufacturing false evidence against this person, as well as withholding evidence from his attorneys. There was no physical evidence that he was there, and there were multiple witnesses verifying the alibi of Kenneth Nixon. But he was convicted because people in a position of power decided he needed to be the one. And because they were too lazy or incompetent to actually do an investigation. Or maybe it was because he was a black man. So why not? Again, I don't know the outcome yet of what's going to happen to the officers that are alleged to have done this. Hopefully they'll be held accountable, but again, I'm not holding my breath. Usually the only cops that are held accountable is after major public outcry and national news coverage. And if you haven't seen this on MSNBC or any of the major news outlets, chances are it might not happen. Now in Chicago, there were allegations of more than one officer engaging in sexual misconduct with migrants. One minor is reportedly has been impregnated by an officer. There are countless of reports of institutional racism within all police departments. And unless people actually admit that this stuff is happening, and until these officers are held accountable by the good officers, by their sheriffs, by higher ups, and if the sheriff is corrupt, the DA, we're going to continue having this problem. And the more we give the police these military-style equipment, the more militant they become. And the more militant they become, the more violent they become, because it's drawing the wrong kind of people. Now, going back to institutional racism, that brings me to Senator Tommy Tuberville. And his claims that white nationalists are not racist. And he's doubling down on his claim that white nationalists are just Americans. And technically they are Americans, but they're racist Americans. And when confronted with the definition of white nationalism, he was like, well, that's your opinion. But it's not. That's not an opinion. That is fact. According to dictionary.com, white nationalism, the belief and theory or doctrine that white people are inherently superior to people from all other racial and ethnic groups, and that in order to preserve their white European and Christian culture, or cultural identities, they need or deserve a segregated geographical area, preferential treatment, and special legal protections. Now, according to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, white nationalism is a group of white people who espouse white supremacy and advocate for enforced racial segregation. Those are the definitions of white nationalism. And I don't know if he's not intelligent enough to realize that, or he's just saying that he doesn't think it's racist to kind of alleviate some of the pressure on him for admitting that he is himself a racist and that he supports racism. So ignorance, stupidity, or just flat out racism, I don't know. He is also, by claiming that white nationalist, the term, is not racist and doubling down on that term, I think he is trying to normalize it. And when you normalize a term like that, it stops having the meaning. And pretty soon you hear white nationalism and you're just like, nah, it's all over the place. It doesn't matter. It happens all the time. It's commonly brought up. It doesn't matter. And so you become numb to it. And in turn, become okay with it. And if he has the intelligence and is just trying to soften the blow of admitting that he's racist and supports racism, that is probably the way he's going. Now, he is also kind of facing a lot of scrutiny because since he doesn't approve of the military allowing their troops, female, to travel to a state that allows abortion, to have that procedure and reimbursing their travel and giving them paid time off, he is holding up military promotions. And he claims to be a huge supporter of the military, that he's got their back, he wants to protect them and fund them, but he's proving in his actions that that's not the case, because he disagrees with a policy within the military. He is going to put our national security at risk. That doesn't sound like someone who supports the troops. You can disagree with the military's policy, but you shouldn't put our nation at risk because of it. There are many generals and higher-ups in the military that say this is actually affecting military readiness, that it's going to affect military recruitment, that younger service members are not going to want to stay in the military. As many as 650 positions could be vacant by year's end. Now, the Defense Secretary claims that this hold is affecting national security and military readiness. The Marine Corps is without a confirmed chief for the first time in more than 150 years. How is the Republican Party that claims to be the party for the military, for the police, that backs these organizations, okay with this? It just proves, like as with everything with most politicians on either side of the aisle, that you don't trust what they have to say. You learn how they are and who they are by their actions, by how they vote. While on the Democratic side, there are those politicians who say one thing, such as we're the party of democracy. For the Democrats, we're the party of democracy, and Republicans aren't. They're still laughing in the face of democracy by not allowing a debate against the presidential candidates on the Democratic side. Basically, what they're saying by this action is that democracy be damned. We want Joe Biden to be the nominee, so we're going to stifle any information or conversation about other potential candidates. So that is an example on the Democratic side of them talking out their mouths, but their actions showing something different. There are far more examples of that on the Republican side. You know, the biggest example I can think of is voting against, I can't remember the name, but the infrastructure, the getting the internet to the rural places, that act that Biden put into place, by voting against that, and then going to their state and their communities and being like, look what I did. Touting how wonderful it is that we're finally going to get internet into the rural communities, that we're finally getting bridges repaired and roads repaired. That's another thing. And like when Trump was in office, I had a conversation with someone who claimed that Trump was pro-LGBTQ+. And he said he was, that he would be the best president for that community ever. But his actions showed a different viewpoint. So you cannot judge a politician by what they say. You have to judge them by how they vote and what they do. Because they can talk a sweet line, convince you that they're the person that you want to vote for, but when they're actually sworn in and in office, keep track of that so that you can vote them out if they don't do what they said they were going to do. Kind of like Biden saying he's going to be the best president for the environment. And he started out strong. But then he approved the Willow Project. He gave Joe Manchin his pipeline. And that negated all progress he had made. And we are in a climate crisis. So no, he is not the best president for the environment. So the direction our country is heading is scary. And it doesn't seem like any of our politicians actually listen to us anymore. And an example of that is Cop City in Georgia. The vast majority of the community of Atlanta does not want Cop City. But the city council and the governor are like, screw you. We want it. So we're going to cut down trees. We're going to damage a minority community. And we're going to spend a ton of money on this place that's not necessary. They're talking in this place of building a miniature town. You know, miniature apartments, all of that kind, not miniature, you know what I mean, but like a replica. And instead of spending that money on a training facility for police officers who aren't going to be trained well enough to do their job appropriately, why not build places that will house the homeless? There's so much bitching about the homeless problem in the population. Do something about it instead of putting your money towards a facility that is probably not going to train the cops well. And that is an issue that we need to address before we provide more training facilities. Cops need to be trained better. So our politicians don't listen. Police don't listen. No one listens to us. The only choice we have is to vote. So like I always say, vote, no matter how big, how small, how insignificant the election. Start small, local school boards, and work your way up. Vote. No, your vote matters. And read. I always say read. Because it's the best weapon we have against the right, is knowledge. And they don't want the community and populace at large to be knowledgeable. That's why they're defunding education as much as they can. So vote, read. Thanks for watching. Thank you to my new subscribers. Like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.